The desert sun hung like a molten coin in the sky, pressing down on the valley with a heat that shimmered above the sand. Sergeant Claire Donovan crouched behind a jagged ridge of stone, her rifle dismantled beside her, every piece cleaned with a precision that bordered on ritual. She was not on mission that day, not exactly, she was waiting. Brass shells lay scattered around her boots, spent casings from hours of practice. She had been firing at targets 2 kilometers away, pushing herself past the threshold of boredom into that rarefied place where skill becomes instinct. Claire had not noticed the patrol at first. The British soldiers were younger, rowdy, their voices carrying across the valley with the recklessness of men who thought war was a game. They were on downtime too, and when one of them spotted her solitary figure hunched in the distance, they drifted closer, curiosity like moths to a flame. Claire did not look up when they arrived, only slid another casing into her palm, polished it and set it down with the others. "What are you doing out here alone?" asked one, his accent sharp, his grin mocking. She did not answer, only adjusted her scope and squinted at the far hills. Another soldier, taller, with a red beard that glowed in the sun, stepped closer. "You're just picking up brass, aren't you? Haven't seen you hit anything. Thought Americans were supposed to be crack shots." His tone was light, teasing, but underneath it Claire caught the flicker of a challenge. She finally turned her head, her eyes cool and flat. 2 clicks out. Targets behind the ridge. You didn't see them. The men glanced at each other, uncertain if she was serious. Claire reached for her rifle, assembling it with fluid motions, the barrel sliding into place, the bolt locking with a metallic snap. She pressed her cheek against the stock, the desert world narrowing to the circle of her scope. At that moment she wasn't aware of the British soldiers anymore, only the thin crosshairs drifting over invisible heat lines. The bearded one laughed. 2 clicks is impressive, sure. But no one here has seen you make a shot. Bet you couldn't hit anything past 3. Claire's jaw tightened. She never rose to bait, never let pride cloud her judgment, but something in the man's voice pierced her calm. She shifted her scope slightly, past the ridge, further still, until the land blurred into pale hills. The distance was insane. Over 3,000 meters of air, wind, and gravity between her and the place she now studied. She could see nothing clear, only vague outlines, rocks that might have been anything. But her mind began calculating instantly: drop, drift, humidity, temperature. Numbers spun silently like cogs. 3,285 meters, she murmured. The soldiers burst out laughing. "Impossible," one said. "That's not a shot, that's a prayer." Claire said nothing. She placed a single round into the chamber, her hands steady. She remembered the last time she had pushed herself this far, a storm-racked night in Afghanistan, the shot taken blind through dust and smoke. She remembered the silence after, the stunned voices on the radio when they realized she had hit. That memory pressed at her now, but she shoved it aside. This was different. This was not life or death, not orders, not a battlefield. This was pride. She exhaled slowly, letting her pulse align with her breathing. The scope quivered with each heartbeat, and she forced herself into stillness, body dissolving until there was only the rifle, the wind, and the stretch of impossible distance. The British soldiers had grown quiet, the laughter fading into something sharper, anticipation laced with doubt. The bearded man crossed his arms, his eyes fixed on her. "If you pull this off, I'll eat my boots." Claire didn't answer. She adjusted for wind, a subtle twist on the dial, then angled the rifle ever so slightly higher, calculating the drop over 3 kilometers. The trigger rested beneath her finger, cold and eager. She waited not for a target but for the right breath. Seconds ticked, stretching into long, suffocating silence. When the shot cracked, it tore through the desert air like lightning. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she absorbed it, never flinching, her eye locked on the distant blur. The sound rolled away, echoing against the cliffs. Nothing happened at first, only the endless shimmer of heat. Then, faintly, almost invisibly, a puff of dust lifted from a rock beyond the ridge. The British soldiers erupted, some laughing in disbelief, others swearing loudly, craning to see through their own binoculars. Claire lowered the rifle and began to disassemble it again, her face unreadable. To her, it was just another shot, numbers aligning with instinct. But to the men around her, it was legend born before their eyes. The bearded soldier removed his hat, smacking it against his thigh. "Bloody hell," he muttered, his bravado cracked. 3,285 meters. No one's supposed to hit that. Claire finally allowed herself a faint smile, barely there, gone as soon as it appeared. "Supposed to," she said softly, "doesn't mean can't." The men stared at her differently now, the mockery stripped from their eyes, replaced by something else, respect, maybe even awe. But respect was not what she wanted. She wanted silence, the weightless moment between the shot and its consequence. She turned back to her scattered brass, picking them up one by one, the metallic clinks punctuating the hush. Somewhere in the valley, a hawk circled high, its shadow sweeping the sand like a watchful sentinel. The world seemed to pause, suspended on the edge of something larger than a bet, larger than pride. Claire felt it too, though she would never admit it. That strange certainty that the shot had shifted something, nudged fate in a direction she could not yet see. Night fell over the valley with the slow inevitability of a curtain dropping, the last streaks of orange dissolving into deep blue. Claire lay on her cot in the makeshift barracks, the hum of the generator filling the silence, her mind replaying the shot again and again. Not because she doubted it, but because of what it had awakened. She had made impossible shots before, under fire, under chaos, when instinct was sharper than fear, but this one had been different. Unprovoked, unneeded, born of a challenge tossed casually into the air. She wondered why it lingered with her, why it felt less like a victory and more like the beginning of something that demanded consequence. The British soldiers had not let the moment fade. They told the story at dinner, their voices loud, their hands gesturing across the table, as though exaggeration were unnecessary but irresistible. 3,285 meters, one of them shouted, slamming his fist on the wood. I swear on my mother I saw it myself. Clean as day. The others echoed with laughter, disbelief, admiration. Claire sat apart, her tray untouched, her rifle leaned against the wall behind her. She did not join in, but she did not stop them either. Every retelling was a stone dropped into the still water of the camp, ripples spreading, reaching ears she had not intended. By the next morning the story had grown legs. Men from other units approached her in the mess hall, their eyes curious, skeptical, some even challenging. Heard you pulled off a miracle, one said, half sneering, half impressed. She ignored him, but the weight of his words clung to her shoulders. It was not the kind of attention she wanted. She had built her career on precision, discipline, invisibility. A sniper's gift was anonymity, the ability to strike from shadows and leave nothing behind but silence. Legends drew eyes and eyes drew danger. Yet the story would not die. Instead, it traveled and with it came whispers. The colonel called her in on the third day. His office was cramped, filled with the stale scent of paper and dust, maps tacked to the walls with red lines stretching across them like veins. He gestured for her to sit, his expression hard to read. I've heard a lot about you this week, Sergeant Donovan, he said, his voice calm but edged. About a certain shot. 3285. Is that true? Claire met his gaze without flinching. Yes, sir. The colonel leaned back, folding his hands. Do you realize what that means? That distance isn't just a record, it's a message. Command is already buzzing. They want to know if it was luck, or if you can do it again under conditions that matter. Claire said nothing. She had no desire to prove herself to command, no interest in turning skill into spectacle. But the colonel pressed on. There's chatter from the northern hills. Insurgents, smugglers, maybe worse. Intel is thin and they've been operating outside the range of our usual patrols. We can't send a team in without risking exposure. But a sniper, one with reach, that could change the equation. You understand? She understood all too well. The shot had painted a target on her back, not from the enemy but from her own side. They wanted to turn her into a weapon, a tool of distance and precision, a myth they could exploit. She nodded slowly. Yes, sir. That night, as she cleaned her rifle under the dim glow of a lantern, the British soldier with the red beard approached her again. His swagger had softened since the bet, replaced by something closer to respect. He crouched beside her, silent for a while, watching the rhythmic way she moved cloth over metal. Finally he spoke. Didn't think you'd actually do it, he admitted. Wasn't really serious about the challenge. Just talk. Claire didn't look at him. Talk has consequences. He nodded, his jaw tightening. So I hear. They're saying you're going north. Saying they want you to make that shot again, but this time with more than bragging rights at stake. Claire finally set the rifle down, her eyes narrowing. You hear a lot. Soldiers talk. Word spreads faster than bullets in a place like this. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Be careful, Donovan. Being a legend isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a curse. People start expecting miracles, and when you fail, they remember that longer than any success. His words lingered long after he left. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of distant wind threading through the canvas walls. She thought of the hills to the north, the unknown shapes moving in the dark, the pressure of unseen eyes. She thought of the shot, the way her finger had pulled the trigger as naturally as breathing. Was it instinct, or was it fate pulling her into something she couldn't escape? At dawn the orders came. She was to move out with a small team, reconnaissance only on paper, but everyone knew the truth. Her rifle was the mission. Her reach was the mission. The men who accompanied her walked with a mixture of awe and unease, their glances betraying the thought that they were marching beside someone who had touched the edge of the impossible. The desert stretched before them, endless and silent, each step sinking into sand that seemed to swallow sound. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, the air rippling with heat. Claire moved with steady purpose, her eyes scanning the horizon, her mind already calculating distances, angles, possibilities. She felt the weight of expectation pressing down harder than the heat itself. Somewhere beyond those ridges she knew something waited. A target, a test, perhaps even destiny. And when it came there would be no laughter, no bets, no bragging voices. Only the silence of the trigger, the whisper of a bullet carving through miles of air, and the truth of whether she was truly capable of what they believed. The northern ridges rose like the jagged spines of some ancient beast, their shadows cutting sharp angles against the desert floor as the patrol advanced. Claire walked at the center of the formation, her rifle strapped across her chest, her gaze sweeping over every crest and hollow. The men with her kept their distance, not out of mistrust, but out of a kind of reverence that unsettled her more than hostility ever could. They whispered when they thought she wasn't listening, words carried just far enough by the dry wind. Sniper, legend, miracle shot. She ignored them, but the sound gnawed at the edges of her focus. Legends didn't survive battlefields. Soldiers did. The first days were uneventful, a rhythm of movement and silence, of sand grinding against boots and sweat carving lines through dirt-caked faces. At night, they huddled near low fires, their voices hushed as if the hills themselves were listening. Claire remained apart, her rifle always close, her eyes on the horizon even when darkness swallowed it whole. She slept in fragments, waking at the faintest shift of sound, the crackle of unseen stones, the distant call of scavenger birds. On the fourth morning they reached the mouth of a narrow pass, the kind of place where an ambush would write itself into history. The lieutenant raised a fist, signaling halt, his jaw tight with unease. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. Claire moved ahead, crouching low, her scope sweeping the cliffs above. Heat shimmered distorted shapes, bending stone into illusions, but her trained eye picked out the details. Too much shadow where there should be none, a faint glint that betrayed glass. She exhaled slowly. "Eyes on us," she whispered. The lieutenant stiffened. "How many?" Claire adjusted her position, searching angles. "At least 3. Maybe more. They're waiting for us to step deeper." A silence pressed down on the patrol, the kind of silence where every breath felt like it might spark a firefight. The lieutenant's knuckles whitened around his rifle. "Options." Claire didn't answer right away. She studied the far slope, calculating distance. 2,000, 3,000, maybe more. The insurgents thought themselves safe behind range, secure in the belief that no bullet could cross such distance with accuracy. She almost smiled. She slid onto her stomach, her hands moving with ritual precision as she unfolded the bipod and set her rifle into place. The men behind her watched in a mixture of awe and disbelief, their whispers falling silent one by one until the only sound was the faint scrape of metal against stone. She slowed her breathing, letting the world narrow to the circle of her scope. Time stretched, sound bled away, and the crosshairs aligned with the glint of a scope half hidden behind a rock. She adjusted for wind, temperature, curvature, the 1,000 invisible hands that tugged at a bullet's flight. 3,000 meters. Maybe a little more. She steadied her finger. The shot cracked, echoing through the pass like thunder. A second later, dust plumed, and the faint figure on the ridge slumped out of sight. Chaos followed. Shouts in a language half-heard carried down the slopes, the scatter of movement as hidden figures scrambled for cover. Claire chambered another round, her eye never leaving the scope, her body locked in the stillness of ritual. She picked. Another glint, another shadow, another mistake of a man who thought himself invisible, and she exhaled. Crack. Another target down. The insurgents had come to ambush, but they had not counted on a ghost that could reach them from miles away. Panic broke their formation, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Some tried to fire, their rounds falling hopelessly short, the bullets dying in the air long before they neared the patrol. Claire kept firing, not with frenzy, but with measured patience, each shot a conversation between distance and certainty. When silence finally returned, it was thick, almost reverent. The lieutenant exhaled hard, lowering his rifle. The men looked at Claire as though she had conjured some impossible spell, their eyes wide, their mouths half open. She rose slowly, brushing dust from her sleeves, her expression calm, almost detached. "Pass is clear," she said. No one spoke as they moved forward, their steps cautious but steady. The insurgents had melted back into the hills, their ambush broken before it could be born. Yet Claire felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only the familiar weight of the trigger lingering on her finger, the echo of shots that seemed less like choices and more like inevitabilities. That night, camped on the far side of the pass, the lieutenant approached her. He was younger than his rank suggested, his face still holding traces of boyhood beneath the exhaustion of command. He sat beside her in the sand, not speaking at first, just staring at the fire as it cracked and sputtered. Finally he said, "I've never seen anything like that. We were walking into death and you—" He stopped, searching for words that seemed too small. "You turned it into nothing. Like it wasn't even real." Claire shook her head. "It was real enough." He looked at her, his brow furrowed. "How do you do it? 3,000 meters? More? That isn't training. That isn't luck. That's—" He trailed off again, unable to name it. Claire poked the fire with a stick, sparks spiraling upward. "Discipline. Focus. Years of practice. That's all." But she knew that wasn't the whole truth. Something in her bones carried the shots, something beyond calculation, beyond training. It felt sometimes as though the bullet wanted the target as much as she did, as though distance itself bent to her will. She kept that thought buried. Soldiers who spoke like that didn't last long. The lieutenant studied her in silence, then finally nodded, though his eyes betrayed lingering doubt. "Whatever it is, keep it. Because command is going to want more. Much more." His words sat heavy in the night air. Claire knew he was right. The story would not stop here. The hills had been only the beginning. Already the impossible shot had grown from a bet into legend, from legend into mission, and now from mission into something larger. Each bullet she fired stretched the myth further, until soon it would be bigger than her, bigger than truth itself. And she wondered, as the stars wheeled silently overhead, how long she could carry that weight before it crushed her completely. The days after the ambush blurred into a haze of marching, scouting, and silence. The men still spoke in hushed tones around the fire, but now their whispers carried a weight different from before. They no longer called her simply Donovan or Sergeant. They called her Ghost, Whisper, Reach. Each new name was like a layer of distance placed between her and the rest of them, a reminder that in their eyes she was no longer entirely flesh and blood but something else, something half imagined. Claire hated it. She had trained her entire career to erase herself, to become invisible, to let the rifle speak while she disappeared. Now invisibility was impossible. Wherever she went, eyes followed, wide and reverent, expectant. She felt their hopes pressed down on her like extra pounds in her pack, heavier than any rifle or rations. Command made it worse. A courier arrived by helicopter 3 days after the ambush, dust exploding around the camp as blades chopped the air. He carried sealed orders, the kind printed with red ink, stamped with urgency. The lieutenant called her into his tent, his expression strained as he unfolded the papers. "They want you to move north again," he said, voice low. "Further than before. There's an insurgent commander, ghost to them like you're becoming to us. He's smart, ruthless, never in one place long, but our intel tracked him to a village near the mountains. They believe he's planning something large. Supply lines, maybe an attack. They want you to stop it before it starts." Claire's jaw clenched. She had heard this tone before, orders wrapped in necessity but soaked in politics. It wasn't just about stopping one man. It was about proving a weapon, showcasing that a sniper with impossible reach could kill even ghosts. She said nothing. The lieutenant sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't like it either. They're asking for something close to 4 clicks. Beyond anything ever recorded. But they don't care. They want the legend to become real. And they want it now." Claire left the tent without a word, the papers folded tight in her hand. That night she sat apart from the fire, her rifle across her knees, the stars stretched endless above her. 4 kilometers. The numbers spun in her head, not impossible, not unthinkable, but untested. Even her longest shot, the bet that had started this spiral, had been nearly 100 meters short. She thought of the bullet arcing through air, falling, drifting, every invisible force conspiring against it. She thought of the man she had never seen, sitting in some hidden room, believing himself safe because no weapon could touch him from so far. She thought of command waiting, eager, watching the legend they had not built but discovered and now claimed. Her hands tightened on the rifle until her knuckles whitened. Sleep never came. They moved at dawn, the patrol thinner this time, stripped to essentials. Less noise, less presence. The lieutenant walked in silence, his face set in stone, the weight of responsibility heavy in his eyes. The British soldier with the red beard joined too, though he had no orders to. He walked beside Claire for hours without speaking until finally, as the sun burned high, he muttered, "This is madness. 4 clicks isn't a mission. It's a story they want written in blood." Claire didn't answer. He pressed on. "They'll use you until you break. Then they'll bury you with honors and use your name to train the next. Don't let them." She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "I don't intend to break." They reached the outskirts of the village by nightfall, watching from the safety of a ridge. The place looked ordinary, mud brick houses clustered close, smoke from cooking fires curling into the dusk. Children played in the dust, men carried water, women gathered near the well. But beyond the normalcy lay the truth: guards with weapons tucked into shadows, movements too coordinated to be casual. Somewhere inside that village the commander waited. The team set up camp behind the ridge, well out of sight. The lieutenant unrolled maps, pointing at rooftops and sight lines, his fingers circling one building marked by intel as the commander's likely shelter. "This is where you'll take the shot," he said. "If the intel's wrong, we abort. But if it's right," he let the silence finish for him. Claire lay prone on the ridge that night, her rifle assembled, scope sweeping across the village. The distance was staggering, the target building a mere shape against the horizon. She ran numbers in her mind, equations stacking into each other like cards in a fragile tower. Wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, spin drift, Coriolis effect. Forces invisible but absolute. 4 clicks meant margin for error reduced to nothing. A fraction wrong and the bullet would miss by yards. She slowed her breathing, watching lamps flicker inside the houses, shadows moving across walls. She imagined the commander sitting there, believing himself untouchable, unaware that miles away a woman lay still as stone, already calculating his death. Hours passed. Midnight came. The village quieted, fires dimming, voices fading into the hush of sleep. Only then did the lieutenant crawl up beside her, his face pale in the moonlight. "Command wants confirmation," he whispered. "Can you take it?" Claire didn't move her eye from the scope. "I can." The words came out steady, though inside her chest something coiled tight, something that felt like the weight of history pressing down on the trigger. She adjusted the scope again, her body one with the rifle, her heartbeat syncing with the silence. 4 kilometers. A distance meant for artillery, not a human hand. She exhaled slowly, every fiber of her being focused on the invisible thread stretching between her and that distant window. The lieutenant said nothing more. He knew the moment had passed beyond words. Behind them, the team held their breath, waiting not just for a shot but for the creation of something larger than all of them. Claire's finger brushed the trigger, her mind empty now of numbers, of doubts, of everything but the quiet inevitability of the bullet. The world seemed to hold still, as if even the wind had paused to see if the impossible could be done. The silence stretched across the ridge until it felt heavier than the rifle in Claire's hands, pressing down on her chest, slowing her heartbeat to something deep and steady. Through the scope, the village window was just a rectangle of shadow, faint light leaking from behind a curtain, the faintest hint of movement brushing past. Somewhere in that room, hidden in ordinary shadows, was the insurgent commander. Claire didn't know his face, didn't know his voice, didn't even know his name. All she knew was that intelligence placed him there, and that she was the only one who could reach across the impossible distance between them. She let her lungs empty, her finger feathering the trigger, her body becoming an extension of the weapon. In her mind there was no village, no ridge, no war, no watching eyes behind her. There was only the line between her and the target, the invisible path the bullet would take through 4 kilometers of air. She squeezed. The crack of the rifle was sharp and final, rolling across the desert like a thunderclap. The recoil hit her shoulder, firm and grounding, but she didn't blink, didn't shift, her eye locked on the scope. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, only the faint shimmer of heat in the distance. Then the world slowed. The bullet cut through air that distorted around it, a tiny shape carving a path through invisible forces. Gravity pulled, wind tugged, the earth itself spun beneath, but the math of her mind had already accounted for it, as though she had whispered to the laws of nature and they had obeyed. A long second passed, then 2, then 3, and then, impact. The curtain in the window jerked violently, glass spiderwebbed with cracks, and the faint silhouette inside collapsed backward into darkness. For a heartbeat longer there was stillness, Then the village erupted. Shouts rang out, doors slammed open, figures poured into the street in panic, weapons raised, eyes searching the night though they would never find the ghost that had struck from beyond reach. Claire exhaled at last, the sound barely audible. The lieutenant, lying beside her, whispered hoarsely, "Jesus Christ. You did it?" 4 clicks. "You actually did it." Behind them, the team erupted in a low chorus of disbelief, curses and prayers mingling as they tried to grasp what they had just witnessed. But Claire felt nothing like triumph. Her hands remained steady, her face impassive, but inside there was only a hollow quiet. She had made the shot, yes. She had proven the impossible possible. But instead of pride, she felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. She thought of the man whose life she had ended from so far away, a stranger whose heartbeat she had reached across miles, whose final moment had been confusion at something unseen. She thought of how easy it had felt, how natural. And that frightened her more than the shot itself. The lieutenant touched her shoulder, eyes wide with awe. "You've changed everything. Do you realize that? This isn't just a mission. This is history. They'll write your name in books for this." Claire shrugged off his hand and began disassembling her rifle with the same calm precision as always. Names don't matter. The shot matters. And it's done. But she knew he was wrong. The shot wouldn't stay here, buried in the desert night. It would travel, faster than the bullet itself, across radios and reports, across countries and commands. It would become something no longer hers, something others would claim and twist until it was legend instead of truth. And legends never left their makers untouched. The team withdrew under the cover of darkness, moving quickly and quietly, though adrenaline burned in every step. The village behind them still echoed with chaos, gunfire crackling uselessly into the night as the insurgents fired at phantoms. Claire walked at the center, her rifle slung across her chest, her expression unreadable. The British soldier with the red beard fell into step beside her, his face pale even beneath the stubble. He glanced at her, then looked away, shaking his head. "I thought I'd seen everything. I thought war couldn't surprise me anymore. But that wasn't human. That was something else." Claire didn't respond, her eyes fixed forward. He lowered his voice. "They'll never let you go now. Command will hold on to you with both hands. You've given them a weapon they never thought possible." She finally turned her head, her voice quiet but sharp. "Weapons don't get to choose." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. They reached camp by dawn, exhaustion etched into every face. The lieutenant immediately began sending coded reports back to base, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. Claire sat apart, cleaning her rifle again, each motion methodical, her mind far away. She felt the eyes on her, the unspoken questions pressing against her skin. How had she done it? Could she do it again? Was there any limit? They didn't see her as a soldier anymore. They saw her as proof that impossibility was an illusion. Later that morning, a helicopter roared overhead, circling once before settling in a swirl of sand. High-ranking officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their faces alight with curiosity and calculation. They asked for her immediately. The lieutenant hesitated, but Claire rose and followed, her steps slow but steady. They brought her into a makeshift command tent, maps spread across tables, radios crackling with half-heard voices. One of the officers, a colonel she didn't know, leaned forward, his eyes sharp with hunger. "Sergeant Donovan. The reports are true then? 4 kilometers. Confirmed kill?" Claire nodded once, silent. The colonel smiled thinly, like a man unwrapping a gift. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "You've rewritten the book on warfare. What artillery once did, a single soldier can now achieve with precision. You've given us reach no one else has." Claire's voice was quiet, even. "I didn't give you anything. I followed orders." The colonel waved the words aside as though they were smoke. "History won't care about orders. History will remember your shot." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And history, Sergeant, is a weapon more powerful than any rifle." Claire met his gaze without flinching, but inside she felt the weight of his words pressing like chains. She had not asked to be history. She had not asked to be a weapon beyond reach. Yet here she was, trapped by the very precision that had once been her freedom. When she left the tent, the sun was climbing high again, burning hot across the sand. She stood at the edge of camp, looking north, beyond the mountains, beyond the horizon itself. Somewhere out there, war would keep moving, battles would keep churning, and command would keep demanding. She knew then with absolute certainty that the 4-kilometer shot had not ended anything. It had only begun. The days after the shot turned the camp into a hive. Radios buzzed with chatter, officers came and went in a steady stream, and every soldier seemed to carry a new version of the story. Some swore she had made the shot blindfolded, others said she had dropped 3 men with 3 bullets at 4 kilometers, and a few even whispered that she had done it with a storm raging around her. Claire listened to none of it. She sat in her corner of the barracks, rifle across her knees, cloth moving over steel in the rhythm that kept her steady. But no matter how quietly she sat, she could not escape the stares. Every pair of eyes seemed to linger a fraction too long, carrying something between reverence and fear. At night, she could hear her name murmured even when she tried to block it out with silence. Donovan. Ghost. Reach. The words hung in the air like smoke. The colonel came again 3 days later, flanked by aides and carrying the polished confidence of a man who smelled opportunity. He found Claire by the firing range, where she had retreated for solitude, though even here men loitered nearby pretending not to watch. The colonel stood behind her as she adjusted her scope, his voice smooth as glass. "You've started something you can't stop, Sergeant. Command has already drawn up plans. You've proven the theory. Now it's time to make it doctrine." Claire didn't look up from the rifle. "I'm not doctrine. I'm a soldier." The colonel chuckled softly, a sound without warmth. "You're more than that now. You're proof that the impossible is within reach. Think about it, armies shaped not by numbers but by precision. Targets neutralized before they even know they're being watched. Wars ending before they start. All because one soldier can touch the world from miles away." Claire finally lowered the rifle, her eyes hard. "Wars don't end that way. They just change shape." The colonel's smile didn't falter. "Perhaps. But history doesn't care about philosophy. It cares about results. And you, Sergeant, have delivered results no one else can. Which is why you'll be redeployed. Not as part of a unit. As a weapon in your own right." The words settled like stones in her chest. Redeployed. Alone. Not a soldier, not part of a team, but a tool, an idea. She had always known the military valued what she could do, but this was different. This was them stripping away her humanity and leaving only the legend behind. She said nothing, only resumed cleaning the rifle until the colonel, unsatisfied by her silence, left her to the whispers of the men nearby. That night, the British soldier with the red beard found her again, his face drawn tight with concern. He sat on a crate beside her, chewing silently for a long while before finally speaking. "They're going to break you, Donovan. Not with bullets, not with war. With expectation. They'll keep asking for more until there's nothing left of you but the shot." Claire didn't look at him. "I don't break. Everyone breaks," he said quietly. "It's just a question of how long it takes." She didn't answer, and the silence between them stretched until he sighed and walked away, leaving her with the rifle across her lap and the weight of his words digging deep. Orders came 2 mornings later. She was to leave by helicopter before dawn, destination classified, mission parameters sealed. The lieutenant argued, his voice sharp with frustration, but command silenced him with a single phrase: "Sergeant Donovan is not to be wasted on routine." Those words spread faster than fire. Not wasted. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was an asset. A weapon. Something to be preserved for maximum impact. The men looked at her differently after that, some with awe, others with unease, and a few with envy so sharp it bordered on hatred. Claire ignored it all. She packed lightly only essentials, the rifle and the tools to keep it alive. Before dawn, as the helicopter's blades began to churn the air, the red-bearded Brit approached one last time. He handed her a small brass casing, polished until it gleamed in the faint light. "From the shot," he said simply. "So you remember it was real. And that it was you, not them, who pulled the trigger." She took it, turning the metal between her fingers, its surface warm from his hand. She slipped it into her pocket without a word and climbed into the helicopter. The flight was long hours of nothing but engine roar and the endless desert unfolding below. Claire stared out the open door, the wind whipping against her face, the horizon stretching forever. She felt detached, as though she were already halfway gone, her body still here but her name already being carried into places she could never control. They landed at a forward operating base nestled against the mountains, bristling with antennas and guarded by soldiers who looked at her with barely concealed curiosity. She was shown to a private room, larger than she expected, with equipment laid out meticulously. Maps covered the walls, red circles marking distant locations. A general she didn't know greeted her with a firm handshake, his voice brisk. "You'll operate from here. Targets will be fed to you. I value individuals. Commanders, financiers, anyone we can't reach with traditional means. You'll be our reach. The legend they've already begun whispering about." Claire's face was expressionless. And when the legend is finished? The general's smile was small, cold. Legends don't finish, Sergeant. They endure. Whether you're alive to see it or not is up to you. That night, alone in the room, Claire sat on the edge of the cot, the brass casing warm in her palm. She thought of the shot, of the 4 kilometers of air and silence between her and a man she had never known. She thought of the colonel's smile, the general's cold certainty, the whispers of the men who now saw her as something other than human. She thought of herself not as Claire Donovan, soldier, but as Donovan, legend, weapon, ghost. And for the first time she wondered if she could still find the line between the two, or if the shot had erased it forever. Outside, the desert wind howled against the canvas walls, carrying with it voices she couldn't quite hear, whispers of battles yet to come. She lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, the casing clutched in her fist, and tried to remember the sound of her own heartbeat before the world had turned her into something more than human and less than free. The missions came one after another, each delivered in sealed envelopes, each with a red stamp marking urgency and secrecy. Claire no longer marched with platoons or huddled around fires with squads. She moved alone, escorted only far enough to reach whatever ridge or ruin command deemed necessary, then left to vanish into silence. She became a shadow stretched across the desert, her name spoken only in briefings and whispered rumors. The first mission after the village was a convoy. A cluster of vehicles crawling along a road miles from her position, armored trucks carrying supplies to insurgent forces. Drones had spotted them, but no airstrike was authorized, too much risk of civilian casualties in nearby villages. So they sent Claire. She lay prone on a ridge, the world narrowed to her scope, the convoy little more than dots inching forward. She measured distance, adjusted dials, and waited. The moment came when the lead vehicle slowed to navigate a bend. Claire's finger brushed the trigger, and a round cracked into the horizon. Seconds later the driver slumped, the truck swerving, chaos erupting in the line behind. She reloaded calmly, each shot finding its mark until the convoy stalled in confusion, its purpose broken. She slipped away before the smoke reached the sky. Reports called it surgical. Soldiers called it miraculous. Claire called it another day. The second mission was harder. A meeting of leaders deep in the mountains, men whose deaths could cripple networks that had evaded years of pursuit. She climbed for hours, boots scraping over loose rock, until the base of the enemy's hideout came into view. Guards patrolled the perimeter, weapons slung lazily, believing themselves safe behind distance and terrain. Claire set her rifle, scope aimed at a window where light glowed faint. She waited through the night, motionless, her stomach hollow, her throat dry, until dawn spilled pale light over the stone. The curtain shifted. A figure leaned over a table. Claire's breath left her lungs in a controlled stream, her fingers squeezed, and the man fell before the sun had fully risen. Chaos followed again, shouts echoing off the cliffs, but by the time the camp realized what had happened, Claire was already climbing down the far side, another ghost slipping into the wind. With each mission the legend grew. Command stopped referring to her as Donovan in official reports. She was the reach, the asset, the precision. The men who carried her orders spoke with a mixture of awe and fear, as though they were briefing not a soldier but a force of nature. She heard whispers from the edges of bases she passed through, soldiers comparing her to myths of old, hunters who never missed, killers whose bullets bent with the wind. They made her larger than life, and with each exaggeration, Claire felt herself shrinking inside, her humanity worn down by the gap between who she was and who they believed. Nights were the worst. Alone in temporary quarters, her rifle disassembled beside her, she would stare at the brass casing from the 4-kilometer shot, rolling it in her palm, its weight reminding her that once she had been a soldier who chose her battles. Now the battles chose her. Sleep came rarely, broken by dreams of glass shattering, of distant silhouettes collapsing, of faceless men falling into dust. She began to lose count of how many lives her rifle had claimed. The missions blurred, targets reduced to coordinates, kills measured in distances, not faces. The general visited her after the 5th mission, his tone brisk, his eyes sharp. "You've redefined the battlefield," he told her. "Enemy movements have slowed, their leaders terrified to show their faces. They know now that distance won't save them. That changes everything." Claire met his gaze with flat calm. "Fear doesn't end wars. It just changes where they hide." The general smiled, unshaken. "Perhaps. But fear is a weapon, and you wield it better than anyone alive." He left her with those words, and for the first time, Claire felt the walls of her room close in. Not because of the general's praise, but because she realized how small her world had become. A rifle. A target. A brass casing in her hand. That was all. Weeks turned into months. Claire's body hardened, but her eyes grew hollow. She spoke less, even to herself, her words stripped down to calculations and commands. The red-bearded Brit found her once at a forward base, by chance more than design. He looked older, lines cut deeper into his face, but his grin cracked wide when he saw her. Still breathing, Donovan. I was starting to think you'd turned into a rumor. Claire allowed the faintest smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Rumors don't bleed. He studied her carefully, his grin fading. But they fade. And you look like you're fading. She didn't answer, only turned back to her rifle, adjusting the scope though it needed no adjustment. He sighed, resting a hand on her shoulder. Don't let them take all of you. Hold on to something. Anything. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the casing warm in her palm. Hold on to something. She tried to remember what she had once held before all this, before brass casings and impossible shots, before legends whispered in firelight. She remembered laughter with her unit, the weight of camaraderie, the simple comfort of being just another soldier among many. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, someone she could no longer reach. The next mission came at dawn, urgent as always, red stamp glaring from the envelope. A financier this time, meeting allies in a fortified compound across the valley. 4,000 meters again, nearly the same as before. Claire assembled her rifle, her motions precise, her heartbeat steady. She set herself on the ridge, scope fixed, world narrowed once more. But as she waited for the shadow to move into her crosshairs, she realized she was no longer thinking of the man inside, no longer picturing his face or his choices. He was already reduced to distance and time, a problem waiting for solution. She felt her finger tighten on the trigger and a cold thought cut through her calm. What happens when there is nothing left but the shot? She pulled. The bullet flew. The shot hit its mark, the financier collapsing mid-conversation, his guards scattering in panic. Another mission complete, another name crossed from a list, another impossible distance erased by her hand. Claire packed her rifle with the same mechanical precision she always did, boots crunching against the stones as she withdrew from the ridge. But inside, the silence felt heavier than ever, pressing against her ribs, hollowing her out. She returned to base to the usual reception. Salutes, hurried whispers, officers with clipped voices speaking of strategy and shifts in enemy morale. They never spoke of the man who had fallen. Only of the result, the ripple. She had become nothing more than cause and effect, input and outcome. Claire moved through the base like a ghost, her presence at once revered and resented. Soldiers fell quiet when she passed, some nodding respectfully, others looking away as though the weight of her gaze might mark them next. Even the general's praise, sharp and cold, slid off her now without meaning. The casing sat in her pocket, polished smooth from endless handling, the last tangible thread tying her to the moment she had been just a soldier who took a bet. Now it was her anchor, the proof she was still real beneath the myth. Yet even that thread frayed. She found herself staring at it longer each night, wondering if the brass belonged to her or to the legend they had forged. Days bled into weeks, missions stacking like stones on a grave. Command no longer briefed her directly, orders arrived sealed, handed over with no explanation, only coordinates and distances. Targets shifted from leaders and financiers to men and women with less clear titles. Couriers, advisors, anyone deemed irreplaceable. She no longer asked why. She no longer heard names. She saw only ranges, angles, and wind speeds. The rest dissolved into abstraction. Until one mission broke the pattern. She was deployed to a ridge overlooking a bustling town, its streets alive with traders, families, children chasing each other in clouds of dust. Her target was said to be among them, a man of importance disguised as ordinary. She unfolded the map, eyes narrowing. The circle marked her target zone lay across a schoolyard where children gathered to play football. Her throat tightened. She radioed command, her voice clipped. Coordinates place civilians directly in line of fire. Clarify. The response came back, metallic and uncaring. Target is priority. Collateral acceptable. Execute. The words hung in her ear, poisonous. Collateral acceptable. Claire stared through the scope, her vision narrowing to the faces of children kicking a ball across cracked pavement, laughter rising in the distance. Beyond them, through an open window, the faint outline of a figure hunched over paperwork, the man she was meant to erase. Her finger hovered above the trigger, her breath caught. She imagined the round arcing through air, the children scattering too late, the ball rolling forgotten as bodies fell. The casing in her pocket burned like fire. Her mind split. One part drilled, disciplined, trained to obey, the other screaming against the weight of expectation. The legend they had built demanded the shot. Claire Donovan, the Reach, ghost sniper, impossible hand of war, she could not falter, could not miss, could not hesitate. But Claire the soldier, the human, felt the gulf yawning open inside her, a chasm into which she would vanish if she obeyed. Minutes stretched into lifetimes. Through the scope, the target shifted, oblivious, while children laughed in the dust. Command's voice cracked again through her earpiece, sharp and insistent. Execute, Donovan. Now. Her finger trembled against the trigger. For the first time in all the impossible shots, all the endless distances, she felt herself not in control of the rifle but chained by it, bound by the weight of myth. She closed her eyes, breath shaking, and in that moment she made her choice. Claire opened the chamber, pulled the round free, and let it fall into the dirt. The click of refusal echoed louder in her ears than any shot she had ever taken. She rose, dismantled the rifle in swift, decisive motions, and left the ridge behind. The radio crackled with shouts, demands, fury. She ignored them, boots steady against stone, each step carrying her away from the legend they had tried to make her into. By the time soldiers arrived, scrambling to secure the site, Claire was gone. 4 days they searched, helicopters sweeping the valleys, patrols combing the ridges, but she had vanished into the desert's endless expanse. Whispers spread fast. Some said she had been killed, others that she had defected, others still that she had simply walked into the horizon and become the ghost they always claimed she was. The truth was simpler. Claire Donovan shed the name they gave her, shed the casing from her pocket, burying it deep beneath stones where no hand would find it. She became faceless again, a figure among villages that never asked questions, a shadow moving with the refugees who crossed borders seeking nothing but silence. She was no longer Donovan the Reach, no longer the legend whispered in firelight. She was only a woman with calloused hands and haunted eyes, searching for the sound of her own heartbeat beneath the noise of history. Yet the legend endured. Reports continued to surface of impossible shots in distant lands, of commanders falling without warning, of bullets that seemed to cross miles. Some claimed she had returned, others that her apprentices carried her skill, others still that the myth itself had become alive, untethered from flesh. Around fires, soldiers still whispered her name, their voices filled with awe and fear. Donovan. Ghost. Reach. And in quiet villages, where no uniforms marched and no rifles gleamed, Claire sat among the faceless, silent, her eyes always on the horizon, listening not for targets but for the rare sound of laughter, the proof that war had not claimed everything. The legend belonged to them now, to the men who needed stories, to the command that needed symbols, to the world that needed myths. Claire Donovan had walked away from all of it. Whether the world believed or not no longer mattered. The casing was buried, the rifle left behind, and the ghost returned to being only human. The end.